in this episode, we thought we would talk to someone called Baba Aye, who actually would be no stranger to a lot of people who listen to this conversation, and in certain ways has been has you could say been haunting the discussions we've been having for a while now, and it's very much been an inspiration to many of our um, listeners, many of our guests, and many of us on the show. So we're very excited to be talking to Baba Aye, who is a trade unionist, a socialist, and co-convener of the Coalition for Revolution, among other identifiers and affiliations that Baba Aye will also tell us a little about in the course of our conversation. But we're really glad to have him here. In fact, we had tried to find a few other occasions to have him, but forces outside of our control, some of them reactionary, but some actually perfectly understandable, have gotten in the way of of our previous attempts. So this has been a long time coming, and we're very excited for the conversation. But let me not detain us much further with intros. I think I'll just say that there's quite a host of issues we could potentially talk to Baba Aye about, and it's our hope that we'll get to talk to him about a range of other issues in the future. But for today, we wanted to focus on the questions around the left and structural adjustment, both historic processes through which the left came into contact with capitalist reforms, the economic reform process, and the ongoing Tinubu-led economic reform process, the ways in which the left is confronting that, and will seek to confront it in the period to come. So that will be the theme of our conversation today. But before we get into the meat of it, let me formally say welcome to Baba Aye, and a huge thank you for making time to speak to us today.
Thank you, Saeed. It's a pleasure, and also other comrades, Emeka, no GB. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be on the Nigerian Scam Incorporated, and I'm very happy to speak on this issue, which actually also speaks somewhat to the trajectory of my political life somehow.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, well, we hope we can weave in parts of the biographical aspect as we think through the history of the left in Nigeria. I mean, speaking of biography, actually, it would be great to hear a bit more about your own trajectory. Just if you could, introduce yourself a little bit, more than I've just done to our listeners, so that we know a little bit about you, and also, crucially, about how you got into left politics, because I think that would be of interest to a lot of people here. So, may we know you, as they say. Bye.
Well, it's quite interesting. I got radicalized pretty early. I was 13, and I'll be 53 in a few months' time. So that gives some perspective on it. And how did this happen? I visited a friend and colleague during the holidays, and I was shocked by I didn't know. Since people could live in such situations. He was living at Bariga, I was living at Akoka, so I was during the holiday I went by. But when I came back, I mean, it was a one-bedroom apartment, him and about 4 or 5 siblings, and the widowed mother. And when I got back, my dad noticed that I was feeling off, and he put pressure on me to know what happened. And when I told him, what he told me kind of set the paths for the rest of my life somewhat. When he said, look, I mean, it's because a few people have much more than what they would ever need, that some people live, and that even a number of people live even worse than what I had described to him. And luckily for me too, he had quite a rich library, Nkrumah, Lumumba, Cabral. I'd known him at that time. I didn't even know he had been a member of the Socialist Workers and Farmers Party, SWAFP, in his youth, until I stumbled on a cache of Advance newspaper. So anyway, so that's initiated it, and I and a number of colleagues during my A-levels decided to try recruit people into an organization we formed then, African Liberation Movement. When we went into the university, I went to University of Ilorin in attempts to recruit someone from the Working People's Liberation Movement. As I would later realize, it was a book that he gave me changed everything. That was Angels, Socialism, Utopian and Scientific, the pamphlets extract from Anti-Doreen. And it like captured it. It spoke to issues I had, it clarified my thoughts. It clarified my thoughts. And that was my first step to being a revolutionary socialist, per se. And the rest, as they say, has been history. So, and this was just shortly after Buhari introduced the SAP. And since then, I've worked on several fronts: the student movement, the trade union, and more partisan fronts like the Labour Party, where I was Deputy National Secretary. Even before then, the Democratic Alternative in '94, where I was Assistant Secretary of Youth, Welfare and Culture in Lagos State. I've also worked within the NCP as National Director of International Coordination, and more recently and proudly so within the context of today's Nigeria, within the African Action Congress. And yes, I'm a member of the Socialist Workers League, which started on January 19 as the May 31st movement. The name itself was inspired by a major event along what we'll be talking about now, which was the anti-SAP revolt of 1989 that reached its peak on the 31st of May. So, I'll say these have been the defining signpost of my political trajectory.
Wow. So you've lived a rich life, Baba, and we really should probably dedicate an episode to just exploring those ins and outs. Like not to flatter you, but those are a lot of the themes, organizations, and periods of history that have really interested us here. So, we really have to come back and talk a little bit more about, your life as a professional revolutionary and what that's looked like in Nigeria in these various moments in time and institutions. But for today, we will focus, as you've alluded, on the particular moment in time that kind of stretches from the early 80s, I suppose, to the present day. And we're particularly interested in that shift that occurred in Nigeria from a kind of economy that people could characterize as maybe Keynesian or, one certainly defined by import substitution and some vestiges of welfare to a more what has often been referred to as neoliberal or more kind of unequal capitalist economy, with that transition beginning sometime in the 80s and stretching, like I said, to the present day. So to try to coin a question that will help us think through that, I suppose one place to start is to say, what were the structural adjustment programs and why did Nigeria adopt them?
Well, thank you. First, on a lighter note, when you were talking about rich life, I was like, thank goodness my wife wasn't close by because you can just say, sure, rich, okay. You don't get money now, only a little in life. But anyway,
Yeah.
I mean,
There are many ways to define rich.
yeah, I know. I was kidding, but that just went through my mind as you were saying it. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, on SAP. And I'm happy that you did start with pointing out that it was a shift from an earlier ISR import substitution industrialization strategy. And yeah, while there are peculiarities of SAP in Nigeria and what led to it, I think it's always critical for us in looking at policies, programs, and politics of states anywhere in the world, including even the hegemonic states, although the hegemonic states play a key role in then setting what I'm talking about. It's necessary to situate things in the hegemonic global context or the historic conjuncture. The earlier Keynesian welfare nation state in the West and the interventionist developmental state in the ex-colonies, they flowed from the post-world order and the struggles, and they were not just given. It was not out of the benevolence of the capitalist. It was born. It was a concession to the radical and revolutionary struggles of working class people and the national liberation movement. By the 70s, partly because labor movements had gotten more institutionalized or were beginning to rely. This is a generalization, of course, on their more institutional powers than their associative powers, and a number of other factors. And then, most importantly, with the fall in profitability of capital, there was this massive. Some would say, especially those from a Keynesian angle, a neoliberal counter-revolution, starting with the experiment in Chile in 73 and then Reagan, Thatcher, blah, blah, blah. Now, to Nigeria. Officially, formally speaking, SAP started in 1986 after Buhari had first sent everybody on a message of Arodon, wild goose chase on whether to collect IMF loan or not. But we should also not forget that one, even still sticking with Buhari, as soon as he came in, very shortly in 85, a year before he introduced SAP, he had declared a national economic emergency, which was to last for 15 years. And one of the key pillars of that so-called economic emergency was pay cuts in salaries of workers. I'm not even talking of wage freezes, which came later with the SAP on top of the wage cuts. This was in 85, even before. And we can even go earlier that, albeit yet not systematic at the time, the austerity measures initiated in 1981 with the Economic Stabilization Act by the Shagari MPN-led Second Republic, and then with an amendment to this act in 82, represented elements of the structural adjustment. And why the structural adjustment? As I said, the broader global context. Well, in Nigeria, this was part of this was like the worm on the hook of the fishing rod of imperialism thrown to the fish of neo-colonies, which led to the 80s, and some will even say the 90s, being lost decades in Africa and Latin America. It was, the death trap. The death trap and and with this, the Volcker shock in 1978 of sharp raising of interest rates in the United States, which made monies that had loans that had seemed cheap when they were taken. And I mean, a good amount of these loans were not just used for industrialization proper. There was a lot of chop and clean out, like say nothing happened. And even those that were supposedly committed for infrastructural development were just mismanaged. A good example is the cement armada scandal, So going back centrally to your question before, so you to save time, is that SAP was unfold as a response and a counter attack response to of the capitalists globally after they were forced to the defensive in the period of the Keynesian welfare nation state and developmental state down south. And in Nigeria, some particular elements of this had to do with ostentatiousness of the ruling class, had to do with, poor vision, poor planning, but most importantly, the dynamics of capitalism, which Nigeria was part of as a degenerate neo-colonial entity, if you ask me. I hope that speaks to it. Thank you.
Thank you for having, giving us that extensive background, and learning from this history and looking at what you've said. A lot has to be unpacked, especially for people that are trying to reconnect with the left and trying to understand, how this connects to what's happening currently at the moment. And the structural adjustment program that you mentioned, anybody that does a bit of digging into history will see that these structural adjustment programs was vigorously resisted by, organizations on the left and students, everybody, workers, the radical intellectuals, So this resistance that we're highlighting, did it have any impact on the implementation of the structural adjustment programs? And how did this resistance, in terms of like the state, cracking down on people that did this resistance, how did this shape the left in general in Nigeria? Because, we can kind of draw lines to the formation of the left and their constellation from that point on, especially in the military era, So how did this shape this resistance? How did it shape the left in Nigeria?
Well, first, yes, this resistance did win some concessions and contributed to delimiting the extent with which the blows of SAP were brought to bear. I'll give some concrete examples, but it's also important to stress that this was both at an ideational level and the level of the more material level of impact of praxis. And so you see things like the demands of alternative to SAP, which if I were me, to a while IBB was saying there's no alternative to SAP, echoing Margaret Thatcher's Tina, there's no alternative. And also a crucial part of looking at not only the repertoire from which the left drew, but also, the latter part of your question of how it shaped the left, is to situate it once again within broader global context in that moment and threads of Nigeria's left history and political history in general up to that point in time. So there were a number of co-determinants as cause and effect in shaping at the left at that moment. And probably the most significant was the decline and then collapse of the USSR within the Cold War in this same period, perestroika and glasnost. And this played significant roles in, amongst other things, some of which later, with the benefit of hindsight, you see as a lot of leftists becoming human rightsists, as and the wellspring of human rights politics as against what they used to describe as, mass democratic politics, political struggle. The most significant stand against SAP was in May 1989, when you had the massive anti-SAP revolts. I was quite involved as a student activist at University of Ilorin. And when you see, part of why we was not only because of that we chose we made 31st movement. We look at where you see the fight back, maybe call it coincidence. There were a lot of, in May, in 1988, probably the first of what has now become normal, fight back against increase in fuel pump price. And don't forget, although in 79, Obasanjo did also increase fuel pump price the first time, but already things had been creeping in 79 to 81, the austerity measures, you get what I'm saying? So, but yep. The rise in fuel pump price had become it started becoming a regular feature from 88. And significantly, the NLC was under proscription. But students and left forces, along with rank and file workers and some industrial unions, took to the streets, forced some reduction. But the anti-SAP revolts tampered the hands of Babangida to some extent. And finally here is that internet, because it's not just about everything is globally determined. You have to look at the global and how the historical development locally or nationally, if you will, up to that point, intersects and intertwined and yeah. So the period in which SAP was formally unfolded also marked a period where elsewhere I've described as molecular realignment of the left in Nigeria. It was within that same period, 86, 87, that, the earlier groups of the Socialist Workers and Farmers Party, Socialist Working People's Party linkage from the 60s to the 80s was pettering out, as that was when you had groups emerging like the Socialist Congress of Nigeria at its founding congress in Sokoto. You had the Working People's Liberation Movement, later People's Liberation Movement, that then in 89 would, along with other groups, constitute the Socialist Revolutionary Vanguard, SRV. Then also for the first time, well, not for the first time, because in the 60s you had efforts at setting up a Trotskyist group, but which didn't last. And then also some in the 70s, but the lasting socially Trotskyist trend emergence was also in that same period with the labor militants, which then became later militants and now TSM. And it was within this context also that we as Mayists, the May 31st movement emerged in 1991, much later, but we from forces that been, well, not so much later, but within that same period of the SAP. So this realignment and the internal tensions that went with this, and which played out most especially in the students' movement, largely because by then the left in the trade union movement had been largely weakened. The internal dynamics, some of this not quite healthy, and they later played out in the broader pro-democracy movement, also contributed to, of course, looking at it with the issues of globally that I've earlier mentioned, and also, economically, man must work, and all that in the nation. All this contributed significantly to the unfortunate decline of revolutionary left politics by the end of the century.
Thank you very much for that, Cap, because it's very important to look at that decline. And we'll know that the left, or in fact, we have a series going on the Nigerian Scam podcast where we ask the question, what is left of the left? And we're trying to dig into, what the people we can connect with, liaise with, see the strength of the left. And around this structural adjustment program time, we know it's in the military era, and there was a heavy crackdown, like you mentioned. So this transition period from the 90s to the early 2000s, how would you, explain the decimation of this left? What were the concrete things we could point to in saying that, oh yeah, or let's say the metrics or indices we can use to point to and say that, oh, the left was decimated, and how will we measure the impact of this repression by the state on left and progressive forces in general, and the long-term impacts on revolutionary movements across the country?
Repression did play a very important role. Repression in several ways. We were arrested, detained. There was even a joke at a time then in the late 80s, early 90s. If they never arrest you at all, you never sure say you be comrade. Although there were even some that were arrested that were actually spies. There was also infiltration, and I'm coming to that. There was repression, there was infiltration, then there was co-optation.
Yeah.
And each of these played their roles together, like, if you like, a profane trinity of not only beheading, but at least endwarfing the left in Nigeria. And I think also a lot of people on the left, there was a discussion I had at the airport some years back with someone on the left, very prominent. I don't want to mention his name here. Why is it that even so, why a lot of the people, it's very clear that they have stopped being left too, and there's nothing left about their leftness, but you still see them insisting on becoming comrades, see them describing themselves as Marxists, and he said that, look, for many people on the left, being left has become more like an article of faith, a kind of secular religion, and to openly then say they are not is like apostasy. And that is why I have said this several other places before. I so much respect Dr. Jibril Ibrahim. Why? I mean, he was a Marxist. He was one of those that my generation looked up to in terms of, ideation and all that. But when he felt that, look, to him, Marxism was not that it should be liberal democracy, he made it very point clear. But that did not stop him from contributing, in the ways, both with ideas and practically, So back to addressing that period, there was these three elements, and these three elements played out in different ways. Infiltration included in the NLC, like what you had, but infiltration went with manipulation. You saw how they got a factionalization within the NLC in '88 and then banned it. With the NANS, you saw the states, the first in 1991, December, 4 leading members of the NANS leadership had to be expelled at the Senate meeting. The Vice President, Faith Osadolo, Senate President, Benga Ajimuda, and 2 others. I can't immediately remember their names. It will come back. For why? Because they were agents of the state, and these were self-acclaimed left leaders. If you had some of them, like Bola Ajimuda, if you had them talk, you would think that he wants to start a revolution. Meanwhile, these were paid agents, And in 94, 95, again, there was a later I realized there was a Directorate for Student Intervention, DSI, set up within the SSS. Wow. It was when money matters amongst those they were giving by 1997. That was when some spilled the beans. Of course. An important element of co-optation, because some of the co-optation were more subtle than the others, was systematic. NGOization. I actually wrote a paper there. Unfortunately, I was one of my lost papers way back in '95. That is to say, NGOization did not just start now. Where was, which I presented at the University of Maiduguri then. NGOization of the struggle, Padiemization and things like that. All these were different items within the recipe of decline at the end of the century. And then this century, oh, mamma mia, bad just got baddest, especially when some also, join PDP, APC, and I mean, well, some of the strongest thinkers within these different parties used to be on our side. Some of them even still call themselves comrade and see as a comrade, and even the way our people think. Today, I said this on one of the WhatsApp platforms on the left, that you will see people that have never contributed discussion on such this thing. Here that they have appointed someone amongst us as a commissioner, minister, special advisor. They start getting congratulations. Yes, you see leftists be proudly saying they are going to the National Institute of Public and a mafia of the ruling class, MNI, so the way we even think, these were things that the people like, and thank goodness some of them are like people like Dr. Segun Oshoba, Professor Toyolo. These are things that before we even go to the people like Escotoyo, and might do not go that wouldn't take. Even the way a lot of the value system within the left, and that's partly because most of the organizations have died, and those that are still alive have largely withered despite battling, and commendably so, against the wind. Yeah.
Okay, where does one begin to even, come at some of the insights that you shared? I mean, I think that for me, part of what interests me, I mean, with some of the things that you've said, so far, is one bit at least that does interest me is this petering out of the left, which I think you locate somewhere around the mid 80s. Something coincides with the beginning of SAP, because I'm not sure, don't ask me who, but I think that there's been some argument to the effect that, that also led to some kind of ethno-religious divide even within, the left, such that by the early 90s, you already had leftists who doubled as ethnic ideologues for all the different sorts of groups, that were pushing for recognition. And then I don't know if there's a way to, I don't know whether that can be explained, within the June 12th era, around the time when you had, if you like, the Third Republic, although I don't think anybody says the Third Republic, anywhere, but coming into like the Fourth Republic, I think that especially now, and in our little chit chat earlier, you had asked her how is Calabar and all that, and I'm like, oh, things are really bad. I don't know that for the generation X or even millennials, whether there's been any time as crazy as this one in terms of how hard things have gotten. In fact, when you were talking about epang, or I was thinking tomatoes and pepper, as basic as that. That's how crazy things are. You have to factor in the cost of tomatoes and pepper in terms of household expenditure. So I guess that where I'm going with that is in the Fourth Republic, this, especially within the Tinubu era, there's this resurgence of like the SAP project, Considering this splintering of the left, what would you say is the pushback? How is the left resisting Tinubu's economic policies? And what do you think off the back of that can be done better or differently if perhaps you had a united left, if there's any such thing as that, or a stronger one?
Thank you. I must say something very, very important before I go into these, important issues you raised. For those that might not know what is meant by Ekpan Kuko, search for it. Not just on Google, search for it to eat. It is a meal fit for the gods, you know. So, to the politics, the decline was not really, it was from the mid-90s. And you see, it rhymes with the other aspect you mentioned of the formation of ethno-regional organizations, which I'll come to. I would even rather say that the mid-80s, which, as I said, was like the molecular realignment of left forces to the mid-90s, was a major high point of the left in Nigeria. It's like that very bright this thing before things get dark. Because never before did the left play an hegemonic role in mass politics in Nigeria like it did in the first phase of the June 12 struggle with the campaign for democracy. Never. Because often in the 60s, there was the mediation of a faction of the left within the trade unions, you know, SWAF behind the NTUC. But the campaign for democracy represented a united body of the left, and which acted in its name to provide leadership for that first. I did something on June 12 for the Republic, which is a website I think is a very good on Nigerian issues generally. And so it could be useful to save us time to go to inform wants to look at that. Since the focus is on the decline, let me not look again from 86 to say 94, 95. That decline and some, let's say, highlights of that decline. You had the split of the National Association of Nigerian Students on the 22nd of July, 1995. You had the split of the campaign for democracy, which had led the first phase of the June 12 resistance from 5th of July, 1993. It split by the 4th of February, 1994. You know, then also you had splits in that period. You know, revolutionary periods throw up questions of principles, of perspectives, of strategy, method, and so on and so forth. Virtually all the major trends on the left, which had just, you know, witnessed the realignment a decade earlier, virtually all, except the maize trend, got split in that period of 93 to 95, you know. You had the Socialist Congress got split into SCON 1, SCON 2. Within the SRV, different of its group got split, and some, you know, aligned went into the ethno-religious, ethno-regional politics much more fervently. You had within the LM, you had the splits, which, you know, in November 93, 22nd, 23rd November, you know, resulted in the CWA, not even as the CWA now, because initially it was an alliance of the breakaway from the old LM with the M31M, and later it became, just them as the CWA. So that was, but at that, even during those period of the splits, things were, decline had now started to set in. This were, you might say, symptomatic of worse things to come. So I'll come to the issue of ethno-regional. Why do I keep saying ethno-religious? Anyway, all join. It was very prominent in the Southwest then, partly because of the ethnic dimensions of the issues of June 12. And the first of these groups was the Odua Youth Movement, which was formed in September 94. And it was a project of left groups, of a left group, which was one of the groups in the SRV at the time. Then the next was the OPC, the People's Congress, in August 95, which, you know, was started more as a mishmash than the OYM, which started as a left project, so to speak. Part of it was, you know, disillusionment. As I said, don't forget also that this was just a few years after the collapse of the USSR and things like that. And then there was also for some seeing it as a shortcut. There were those that, because like, for example, Yorem that also came up later that said Yoruba self-determination is pathway to socialist revolution and things like that, it will be easier to mobilize the working class that speak same language and all that, la da di da da la di da da, So this was the context. This was the context, and from 95 onwards, the decline, and then with the bourgeois democratization, the civilianization of the state, so to speak, a bad situation of a slippery pathway became a terrible context of jumping into the abyss. Most of the groups collapsed. There were efforts to revive them, both within different organizations, but also collectively. There was the February 21 to 23, 2003 Third All Nigerian Socialist Conference at Benin, which set up a Nigerian Socialist Alliance. Chima Obani played a key role in that. But that's withered. Long story. I speak to this more in some other spaces. I was quite involved in that as well. Then there was, by 2005, efforts again with the setting up of the All Nigerian Socialist Alliance, 27 to 28 October 2005, at the burial of Chima, and so on and so forth. But let's fast track to where we are now, and the question about how is the left pushing back, and the dynamics, and first, which of the groups in existence then are still in existence? Just a handful, with some of these splits along several lines. Like you have the Trotskyist group, then like 3-4 groups now, but very active you have the M31M with some deserters jumping ship. But when you look at the Marxist-Leninist groups, they've collapsed. You have individuals with respectable folks, but largely non-alive. And part of it is you can, without regeneration, and organizational life, people are individuals as leftists. And so you have had a couple of well-respected leftists speaking. I remember there was this discussion on the WhatsApp group. I was pointing out that, look, it's not just about shouting and condemning that, look, about Tinubu is making life. If we don't organize to push back, it's not about being able to talk big grammar, So concretely, where can we locate pushback? Where can we locate pushback? And what are some of to me, one, I say there are the united fronts, you have the joint action front, you have the efforts at reviving the united action for democracy, you have the coalition for revolution, and a few others. Then you have the political parties, and particularly so I think the African Action Congress and the Take It Back movement. If you talk of a left force, and it's unfortunate you see a lot of people on the left say, you say they are Marxists. But that's hogwash. If there is a concrete fighting platform with a critical mass in the country today, it is the AAC-TIB. I mean, and when one hears what some on the left say, what goes to one's mind is, what's it called? Escotoyo's letter to the left about PRP. And it is significant that the PRP vanguard, which carries on that banner of the NEPO PRP era, is in alliance with the ANC. It is very significant. But and that's, as there had always been some elements of pettiness in the left. But the more people were doing less and less practically, the more the pettiness went at geometric rates. And it reminds one of, the issue of squabbles of exiles, the Russian emigres and all that. So the pushing back it requires a critical, something like what AACTIB stands for. And that is why, like the recent independence action last week on June 12th, the different organizations and coalitions were involved, yes. But the heartbeat of it was the AACTIB, because it's the only one with that capacity and on a pan-Nigerian basis, which was demonstrated with the Revolution Now campaign. So what are the other places people are looking at and things like that? Two, and these are somewhat intertwined. You see a lot of criticism of the trade unions on calling on strike, then calling it off or protest. A number of these are quite justified. But the way, especially when they come from rank and file workers and whatever, but the take of the left in terms of castigating the trade union on one hand and looking upwards to the trade unions on the other is more of a reflection of the left. They are seeing the trade unions more as crutches for their own impotence.
Yeah.
And it's bollocks. And it also partly rubs off on this illusion of the organized labor is taking back Labour Party, let us move into it. Bomb back, lads. Pardon my French, for goodness sake. I was the founding leader of that party in its leadership for over a dozen years, including as Deputy National Secretary. It is, how do people describe the Democratic Party as where radicals, graveyard of where radicals' tendencies go to die? That is what the Labour Party in Nigeria is evolving to be. That's a social democratic, if even social, but a reformist illusion. At the very best, let's not even go into questions about the obedience and all these things that go around with it. If I start this one now, we go face that one until. But to sum up with your question about the pushback and possibilities, people should not forget that it is not leftists that make revolutions. It is the people. And that's why you have elements of spontaneity and organization. Almost every revolution has started with a spontaneous ignition. But you need revolutionary organization to provide leadership for it to move beyond just starting to having chances of success. So revolutionary movements are like, kits. But revolutionary organization in this sense does not necessarily mean just one organization. It's about the element of organization rooted in the masses, in the working class people themselves. It could be a coalition or coalitions or coalition of coalitions, but organization that give, education and direction. Those are the two key elements of what political leadership is in political struggle. Without that, it is such organization that serves as steam engine that can convert the heat of spontaneity into the movement of social progress, revolutionary transformation, and political triumph. So this is what we need to build. The NSAS showed that, look, people can rise themselves, although, and that goes to say, they go see back on TIBAC, the role the TIB, particularly Omoyele Sowore, played in instigating that. Some say they dismiss it. Even Obi Ezekwesili confirmed this with tweets. Yemi of the EIE also confirmed this during one of the anniversaries of the NSAS. That look, this was the starting point, both in terms of online and mobilizing to police headquarters in Abuja. And also after NSAS, it is the organization that has followed up on those that have been detained. But what I was trying to say is you saw that relative spontaneity of it, but leadership in terms of the capacity to, because also it's not just pushback of the left with the years of decline and so much, we're in a period of what Gramsci described as that interregnum, where the old is refusing to die and the new is not strong. Yes. So you have that with things like, with no need for political leadership, but behind which it is a few reformist people. Some of our members of Coalition for Revolution, members of AACTIB, some were beaten up at the early hours in the first week of this thing, and it almost degenerated in Lagos. We said, no, don't fight. Copies of the core charter of for total liberation were torn. Why? Because somewhere we don't want to lead that, but behind that, reformists, even in some senses, reactionary politics, some conscious, some not so conscious. These are kind of things you see when we in that moment of the festival of the oppressed that the revolutionary situation is, especially after such lacuna of revolutionary socialist critical mass presence within the mass. So you saw all this, and these are the things that we need. We witness also more of, and the need for the left to get its act together in building critical mass, including alliances, coalitions, and less recrimination where such is not necessary and just based on pettiness and things like that. I want to stop there before I go on and on. Thank you.
And then you seem vexed. So
don't be lie.
Rightly so.
I understand that. I understand where, if you allow me, where some of that frustration comes from. I mean, I get frustrated. In fact, it's ironic that I'm the one posing the question about what is to be done, because I think that question irritates me, and some of my comrades will bear me witness. What the left has been doing, and thanks for your response, because it sets me up for it sets things up rather for my final question, and it's still in tandem with some of what I had begun to say, which is that I think that the left has resisted for a long time. You do well to contextualize the moment that we are in, and although we trace some of this history from that period of structural adjustment in the Nigerian polity, I think this is my personal opinion, that some of the left's finest moment happened or seemed to have happened or occurred in the 70s, and just thinking about it, I don't know if there are similarities, but when we talk about these divisions and the factions, there was some effort in the 70s, just before the 78 election, to bring what some might call the organic and the inorganic left intellectuals together. By that I mean lefts who had background in the labor unions and labor movement, and then some of what you might call the intellectual left, within the four walls of the universities, and then I think that this vision or this form of action coalesced into what, you would know this, what you call the MPD, right? But part of the history and that what we get from, that effort is that, even before the 1979 elections, right? You already had the Socialist Workers and Farmers and Youth Party, and then you had the SWPP, as a result of that effort, and then you had, I think that perhaps that, if the left was already factionalized before, some of that effort, it then became even more factionalized, and one way that I think about is the prominence of different schools. So you had the Ibadan school on one side, the Calabar socialist group on the other side. You probably had guys from Lagos, and then to get to the meat of it, even though I think maybe I have popped the question, but and this is again is my opinion. I think that there's something organizationally wrong, with with the left, in terms of how it even in its, like, so I'll give an example. I don't know where Scotoyo says this. I don't think it's his letter to PRP or on behalf of the PRP, to letter to Marxists. I think there's somewhere where he says that part of the reason why at least the Calabar group didn't support the Badon group in terms of the floating of a party, or even any party, at the time of the 79 election, was because, how did he say it now? That there was no, that there was, that the movement didn't even have people, or that there was a party without the masses, and that. But I think one of the things he said that stuck with me was that you couldn't organize this, that the parties couldn't even meet the constitutional requirement of HQs in 15 states, because at the time we were running a 19-state structure. So when you even talk about state creation, I wonder to what degree some of these things altered, or affected the left organization in terms of its ability to forge, some kind of vision, articulate, a forward-looking vision, of what, or how economically Nigeria should be reconstituted. I know that, in theory or theoretically, that there's a paper that the Badio Nimodez and Olaoni, from the Ibadan school, put forward in the Review of African and Political Economy sometime in 1974 about, a socialist alternative. But what I don't know is if that's something that, in general, the left would take up. So, I think the point that my question, to put it directly, is this envisioning, and selling it to the people. Is it something that's lacking? Is it something, because I get the sense that that's something that has lacked, I get that sense, especially because, there's this ambivalence within the left, when it comes to the issue of national question, which, if you ask me, is one of the biggest and costliest mistakes that the left, that failure to address it head on.
I'll start from the issue of unity. I think the argument of left unity, and I've faced this several times, even within our organization at different points, is a kind of bogey. It's a bogeyman. Look, a complete unity of the left is neither ordinarily feasible or even necessarily desirable. It's not. It's just like the issue of when people conflate working class unity and trade union structural unity. There was something that even Adams, who is not by any stretch of the imagination a leftist, pointed out during the 2005 labor leadership retreat, which we held in Lokoja. It was on the Democrat side, that's the anti-communist side, during in the 80s, when you had this. He said that when they buried the hatchets in 1988 between the Democrats, the anti-communists, and the progressives that were the Marxists, they thought that, by dying. And also SOZ Ejiofor said something similar at a range school, that things will be better. But is that other forms of divisions came in. This was at the time that you had the NUT split along ethno-regional lines. You can have it as flash in the pans, but there's nowhere really you've had. Look at the histories of revolutionary movements across the world. The successful or the unsuccessful ones. Look, Russia, which is like, the far left Bukhari as banner of the earth. You had Bolshevik, you had Menshevik, and you had several other ones, So there has never been, and look at it progressively. Italy, German, the true Nigerians and all that. So the differences is iron sharpened iron. It also enables enrichment of theory and practice with different organizations. What I always talk of is there's the need for at least some rules of engagement. And that's why the pettiness, the underhand approach, the lies and bickerings are what I have issues with. Not the fact that there are several organizations. And I think even that you might not totally wipe it out because there are different kind of human beings and with different kind of home training and personal self-development or otherwise. It speaks more to weaknesses of people that play those kind of politics. But at least there should be some group thinking of reducing those kind of this thing. There is enough for us to fight about in a principled manner that is productive for the movement as a whole, beyond such pettiness and lies and underhand campaigns of calumny approach. Regarding the 1970s being the highlight. Yeah, I'll say 70s, 80s. But it's also, and I'm happy that Emikus spoke of, he said organic and non-organic. I don't think it's that simple. Yes, there was a faction of the left that was embedded in the trade union movement, and there were those that were in the ivory towers, as I said. I write more on this in a recent book, Revolutionary Movements in Africa, an Untold Story, where I and Adamaya wrote the chapter on Nigeria. And I'm working also on another book project for a chapter that looks also at some aspects of this deeper. And well, the thing also is situating, because we need to understand the underlying material basis of historical developments. Is that the left in Nigeria, had traditionally been strong within the labor movement, right from the anti-colonial struggle, in which you saw even those outside that were active in the Zik East, a significant number of them, like Nduka Eze, Gogo Chu, they were also trade unionists and so on and so forth. And someone like even Escotoyo, that was not formally speaking a trade unionist, was active, with the trade unions, and even in his capacity at a point as a teacher at a Boys, was also active in organizing as a worker, but by the growth of the, for want of a better phrase, ivory tower left, and which itself had several trends, by the 70s, which is probably why Mekos pointed that out as a high period. It reflects the growth, the national development in Nigeria. By the time of independence, you had essentially just one university, although by 1960, a few months after, I think by November, UNN also started admitting people. So let's say 1960 ended with 2 universities. By 1970, we had about 5. Between about 12 more were added between 1970 and 1980. So in that period, you had larger concentration of students and of the lecturers to teach them. This included, particularly in the 60s, those that coming from abroad, Olaoni and Onimode and all that, which is why the Wahab Goodluck and Co, Tunji Otegbe, that were in the SWAF NTUC, described them as, the Londoner come and things like that. By the 70s, also this included, people that most of them, they maybe their first degree and they went to study abroad and come back, like the likes of Professor Toyo Lorode and started lecturing, or those that, studied only outside to people like Festus Iyayi, Dikwa Fasino, a number of these also to Eastern European countries, or that's even to the belly of the beast. But long story short, this was the context in which you then had the robust ivory tower left. And talking of the parties, then there's a thread of continuity between the divisions that took place in the mid-60s with the Socialist Workers and Farmers Party formed in August 1963, and then with the split of the Nigerian Labour Party led by Michael Imodu, with the likes of Esco Toyo, Baba Omojola, Mayure Yenege, Kola Gbodi, being the driving force. So when you look at what happened in the conference Emeka spoke about, the split, the SWPP, the Socialist Working People's Party, was more or less a reincarnation of the SWAF, and the Socialist Party of Workers, Youth and Farmers, farmers and youth, was a reincarnation of the NLP. It was similar to what was happening with the bourgeois parties, where you had the UPN as more or less, that one was never more or less a reincarnation of the Action Group. The MPP, more or less a reincarnation of the NCNC. The MP, and a bit more complex than just a reincarnation of the NCNC, because when history repeats itself, it's not even just about whether as tragedy and fast, but to draw from grass. It's never always in toto, So, so you also had that differences of element. They're talking of Ibadan group, and take your time. How can you say maybe Lagos? Lagos has always been the capital of working class struggle. When you are talking, so you had these different groups, and this also is nothing strange at that level of development of the Nigerian left, just of left movements generally. People talk of the Bolshevik Party now like as if it just jumped from the sky. No, initially it started with small circles in the St. Petersburg League of Struggle for Emancipation. Different cities had the different ones and all that, and then started coalescing. So it's not an unusual thing. And partly also, don't forget the place of information communication technology, transportation, and all this, their growth. And Marx speaks to this, Marx and Engels speak to this in the Communist Manifesto, how this also play a role in how the working class and its movements develop. So all this, it wasn't unusual that groups started. Then you had the Socialist Forum, you had the Bala Boys, as some will call them in ABU, and so you had the Calabar Socialist Group, as you earlier mentioned. Gradually, they started evolving. And the place of ASU is also an important one, because, when they talk of something like the SCON, I think you cannot talk about it without talking about ASU, although it's not only that it's every lecturer that is on the left is SCON, but in 1978, the ASU's also played a key role. ASU's emergence played a key role in that process of national aggregation of groups, and which is one of the things that I think flowed into and was consolidated with the molecular realignment of the mid-80s that I spoke about. Don't forget that before ASU, you had the really conservative teachers, National Association of University Teachers, which was formed in 1965. It was literally forced by rank and file members into a strike action in 73 or 74. I remember Biodo Jeifo, recollections by him and also by Dr. Segun Oshoba, the doyen of the left in Ife then. I had the privilege of being at his 80th birthday in 2015. Unfortunately, I've not been able to see him since then, partly because shortly after my relocation to continue working for the working class, albeit on the global stage. But back to this, that why should you go and take up leadership of this conservative organization? But part of the dynamics unfolding then, within and beyond the university system, the academic, contributed to it becoming not just a radicalization force, but also an exemplar of union internal democracy, which also contributed to its growth and development. Unfortunately, I'm sorry to say, partly even this generation of ASU is not what the generation of ASU in the 80s, 90s were. And it's also partly also because of the collapse of the student movement. Now, yesterday student, they become lecturer today now. So all this to then come to this the question of now you give me jam question. I'm trying my best to be as summary as possible in responding to them, but trying to capture as much as possible. So with regards to I think we should for time be coming to maybe the last of the sub questions within that question, because you then also you spoke to the issue of the ethno-regional or the national question. I think the national question has different groups and different intellectuals on the left have at different levels of engagement with it theoretically, not only different levels, different ways, and practically, in which some have collapsed into ethno-regional organizations, justifying it with all the ideologies in this world for some. But finally, the question of alternative. You mentioned that when you spoke about the Olaoni Anonimo, there's, a socialist alternative for Nigeria. Because the burning question of any serious movement should always be what is to be done. To what extent has the left presented alternatives? What alternatives have the left presented on the national question, on class dynamics, on revolutionary transformation of society, and so on and so forth? Before I go into that, let me point out, and I say this with all sense of seriousness, I think that over the recent decades, there has been sharp decline in intellectual rigor of leftist, active, to some extent or the other, because when I say very few are even active in any serious manner in organizing. Most mental production are by people away from organizing, and most of these even outside the country. And it's a shame. It's unfortunate because this cannot but undermine the quality of the kind of alternatives you have. And it seems that there is an inverse relationship to people's intellectual depth and how so sure they are of the half-baked ideas they are pushing for. I'm sorry, but I mean, that is how I see. And you will see them arguing with all sorts of vigor, like, substituting generalizations with theory for theorization, and so that comma cannot but come out. With regards to alternatives, it goes beyond just anybody can say democratic control and management of by workers and this, that, nationalization of commanding height of this thing, blah, 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 la, di, da, da. No, it goes beyond that. You see, and this is where rope played a key role, was pivotal in the 70s and 80s for the Nigerian left in terms of debates on the issue of, the peasant question, the working class, even military vanguardism. Since the debates, lively debates. Now, echo chamber. So, looking at ideas, possibilities of alternatives, we're in a process of having rebuilt if there will be even hope for the future. The thing is, people some say that it's socialism or barbarism, which is a correct position drawn from Luxembourg. But the thing is, we're already in era of barbarism. It's socialism or catastrophe. And but for us to be able to change the world, because Marx said that the point is to change it, but he did not say that interpretation to be jettisoned. It should rather not just be understanding of the world for understanding's sake, but with an aim of changing it. I think rather than going into what are the alternatives that have been put forward, I think the question should be, how do we go forward towards reinventing robust discourse within the left?
Absolutely. That was even going to be our kind of final question to you, as a way of wrapping up. So I don't know if you have like a couple of words on that. I know we've been quite unfair to you, posing jam questions, as you said, and then tapping our wristwatches while you're talking. But but yeah, I mean, if you could just throw in, not to try to squeeze some few drops of sunlight from you. I mean, in what is genuinely a dark situation. But yeah, I mean, what could that look like? An atmosphere where there was a bit more robust engagement amongst organizers, activists, intellectuals, and then we'll have to thank you for your time. But yeah, let me let you come back in since I interrupted.
Yeah, no problem. There are a few elements of what is to be done regarding that question. First, there's the need for a left journal, a Nigerian left journal, without prejudice to the need of, going back to the kind of engagements within Europe. By journal, I'm not talking of in an academic sense now of the peer review extent of all that. There was the Mass Line, which was being published by SRV. And then there was the Working People's Vanguard, which we were publishing as Abuja Socialist Collective, which was a monthly newspaper. And the WPV was adopted as the answer mass circulating paper, and the Mass Line was to be the cadre paper for a theoretical journal. Unfortunately, because I was always on Baba's neck for it, he sent out calls. Most time there were only 3 people that I would ever respond myself. Festus Iyayi, and I can't remember the third person. And so, long story. So even just saying now about the journal it does not address everything, because we need feedback. Although there are different, it could even be an online. To stimulate a quarterly or a bi-monthly for, robust debate exchange across the different strains. And such would also contribute not only in terms of ideation, but also in terms of some form of norm setting of rules of engagement and things like that. I also think that I'm happy with the great work in which someone, Said, for example, amongst others, do with regards to, this archiving of left this thing. But I think that we should not get into the kind of silos that defined those trends moments. Mm-hmm. Right now, you have the Olaoni Library, you have the Baba Mojola, you have Solar. I think we should pull this together, something like a Nigerian Socialist History Society, which pulls this together, and we have a combined synergy, rather than this will not only have impact on the work of this historical archival work, but also contribute to deepening that sense of a new atmosphere, if you will, a new, like I said, norm setting of collaboration within the left. Then the issue of the students' movement, you see, there are only a handful of the left groups still in the students' movement, partly because most others have collapsed. But some even still have fronts, like the CDHR. Organizations that used to be behind the CDHR have collapsed, but then you have the SWL, Socialist Youth League, which is aligned with the SWL on campus. You have the Education Rights Campaign aligned with the TSM and things like that. I think there's the need to give serious consideration to work in the students' movement for regeneration of cadre. And we can also turn around a poison into some pieces of meat. By this, I mean, when you look at the entry of an increasing influence of NGOs in the democratic movement, it has led more to the NGOization of leftism in several quarters, while it could be rather useful for projects like this work in the student movement that I mentioned, especially if lefts that are sincere and serious about working for a renaissance of the left work together. An example is, there are a few examples which could be built on. There's the activista thing Action Aid was doing. Then there was the excellent work being done by Social Action with its anti-imperialist camp. I learned they've changed it now to Social Action Camp and political education schools, this was very useful for a generation of activists, students and youth activists in places like Calabar, Uyo, Benin, between in the north, between 2000 and the early mid 2000s into the mid 2010s. Then the place of sorry, and I'm hey, I'm going to be just a few minutes. Then the place of the ecological dimensions of the revolution. I think that in Nigeria, both that and the international dimensions have not been as integrated into our praxis as ordinarily should be. It's a shame that in 2000, and it's not something that is just starting today. In 2003, the All Nigerian Socialist Conference did not even have anything to say about, the war looming in Iran. Against Iraq. More recently, with the climate, you don't see the left being involved in the global climate strike things and things like that. But we have a couple of, there are organizations that could be tapped into to like the Home of Mother Earth Foundation of Inimu Basi and all that. So long story short, we need to taking power seriously. We need to take building the revolutionary movement for a revolution seriously. And that entails very unsexy actions that need to be done now. Or first, telling ourselves the truth of where we are and genuinely contributing to rebuilding theoretically, organizationally, to strengthen our political presence within working class people and to be able to adequately challenge capital, its states, and imperialism. Thank you.
Man, that was just very loaded, because there's a lot for us that talk to people that are deep in the struggle, have a history with the struggle, trying to, in fact, connect with the new generation. There's a lot for us to unpack, digest, and make people, learn. And, with all the things that your experience self have, like you brought to us, we are going to definitely have to chew on that. And thank you so much for giving us that well-rounded, broad, historical, insights and connecting it with the current state in our country and the world as we have it. So we thank you very much for coming on the program, and we hope to talk to you soon on other parts of the things you've mentioned, especially the NGOization of the struggle. That's an interesting one that we will probably break down, because it's broad to talk about too, and very interesting. So thank you for coming on the show.
All right, my pleasure, comrades.
Thank you very much. Yeah, to have a nice day.
All right.